Hey, good to see you. I love getting together and talking here and catching up. And today, what's been on my mind that I wanted to just sort of, riff with you about has to do with something that came up in one of our recent convenings. And it's about this idea of um, failure and celebrating failure, creating an opportunity for failure, learning from failure. And, it made me think about, when I was all of the constructs around that idea of failure, right? And this world we live in, like be successful or you're nothing, right? And I was thinking through how, I wish that there could be a lot more personal reflection among donors and philanthropists about how they make failures every single day in their life. For example, I was cooking dinner for my mom last night. I'm here in Minneapolis visiting my mom. Cooking dinner for my mom last night, and she's on a special diet. And I messed up. I put something in that I wasn't supposed to put in. And I could have gone down this route of, oh my goodness, you're so stupid. What's the matter with you? Why'd you do that? You shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Or I could have said, it's okay. I'll just pick out the thing from the dish that she can't have. And I know that that might sound kind of cheesy, but that micro analysis that I stumble all the time is something that I wish that we could. I guess, what are your thoughts about that? How does that kind of experience, that daily reflection that we do as resource rich people, right? That why don't we impart that sense of stumbling to people in other countries, or to people in our network, or to people who are asking for a micro grant? Why don't we do that? I'm not talking about
Yeah.
climate change group needs to learn from failure. I'm talking about how do we do that in our relationships with people that are getting micro grants.
I love that. I think that's such a, love that reflection, and it's such a good question too. Like, how do we go about creating a community especially in this like funding social impact space where we're not afraid to fail, but rather celebrate failure, right? And, this convening. So we have these monthly convenings, and this week we were talking to someone who's an innovator, someone who's worked in this space. And one of the things that she said that I really loved was the definition of innovation is to make things better, right? I love those three words to define innovation. And you cannot make things better if you're afraid to fail, because you're just going to follow the current path, whatever it's been, right? The
Mm-hmm.
handbook that was developed 20 years ago, if you don't want to fail, you're going to just go that direction. It's just really the road most traveled. However, a lot of the times, most of the times, I might say, most innovators that we work with, the ones that we are, supporting and guiding, oftentimes are not choosing that path. They're choosing the paths that are a little risky on sides, right? They don't really
Mm-hmm.
know if it's going to work. They have a
Mm-hmm.
hypothesis, they have a passion, they have a community to support their work, but oftentimes they don't have a research paper that says this proven solution is going to solve this problem. That's not the case. And so, in many ways, they're taking that risk of their own kind of reputation, their own kind of career to launch these projects. And then the funders that we oftentimes talk and oftentimes see are then a little bit scared to invest in that, because exactly, there isn't a research paper that backs it up. And oftentimes they don't have that kind of asset to be able to say this solution will kind of eradicate this problem in my community. And so I think that like lack of, I don't want to say necessarily uh, symmetry, because there is some form of symmetry for sure, but there is a lack of, information transformation that's happening between like social impact leaders we work with and funders who oftentimes are looking for a specific solution that's proven, innovators that cannot just follow the same solution. They're tired of the status quo. It is because the status quo hasn't worked that they are now doing what they're doing. And I think there's a huge mismatch that often happens, which I think leads to some of that, you know, funding never getting to the people that actually are coming up with the more risky ideas. In many
Yeah.
ways, risk is a great thing, right? Like if we didn't take the risks in our lives, we wouldn't be there. The food you made, because you took the risk, maybe you're going to make it better. Maybe you're going to make it differently next time. And I think that risk has to be encouraged and promoted and funded for sure, I think. What are your thoughts, Gail?
Right, right. I think what you said is so true and so important for us to remember. And I get, so curious about why this sort of concept of taking risk is just a little bit like harder when it has to do with somebody taking money out of their pocket. I mean, what is that? I don't know why we can't sometimes just say to ourselves, here's what I'm going to invest in, here's what I'm going to support, here's where I'm going to give my, donation. But why, and I'm going to accept that nothing may happen with it, right? Just like, I don't know, maybe there's just not enough examples in this world of things we do and quote unquote nothing comes of it, right? Like you go to catch a bus and you, I swear that you know what the bus schedule is, and you get yourself together and you go to the bus station, and then you get there, it's like, oops, they changed the schedule. But that doesn't mean that your day's been ruined, hopefully, right? It means it might be, abbreviated in some way, or you shift. And I just don't know why is it that as humans we can make those calibrations on a mundane level, cooking, getting the bus, right? um, but we can't make them when it's giving money. I don't understand that very much.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm naive. I just think that there's a little bit of a block that gets in the way. What do you think that is?
Well, I think in many ways it's also the kind of association that money oftentimes has with power, right? And I think we've talked about money, power, and dynamics of this too a lot. And I think in many ways giving up power, right? Because if you don't know the result, right? Anything you do, if you don't know the result, there is a sense of, helplessness and the powerlessness that oftentimes one can feel. And so one kind of really simplistic answer to your question is perhaps this kind of power grabbing or power control that I think a lot of people are used to. Oftentimes when you say invest in a project, but you don't know if the return on investment in a social level is going to be there or not. It might work and thousands of people might get benefit, or it might not work and this person will still learn, but thousands of people aren't going to get benefit now, but maybe in 5 years, right? Like there's that patience level. And I think oftentimes people feel like, oh, 5 years, that's my power is just diluted. Now I can't have that sense of control that I like to have with my money. When you go to, you get a bus ticket, right? I think that's a great example. For the money that you pay for your ticket, if you miss a bus, you can catch the next bus.
Right.
But if I told you you've got to wait here for 5 days and then a bus might come, you're a little less. And so I think that for me, that's like one kind of thought of like, I think human beings generally, and I think the dynamics of the funder becomes so much more complicated because oftentimes these are people that are really passionate. They care about the social issues they're supporting, especially in the sector that we work in. So they have the passion, they have the values to really support organizations. But I think once that control gets loose, I think anyone, and I think you could flip the script and you could put anyone from the nonprofit sector into the funder's chair. And I feel like everyone's going to have that same kind of insecurity around the control that one really likes. And I think that's maybe more of a human problem, but we see it a lot more present, especially when we talk about people with money and especially in the world of philanthropy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a human inclination. I agree. And I do think that it will mean reflecting on some of the core roots of, philanthropy and, altruism and charity, right? And you think about, you know, the years that, let's say, the faith-based community has raised money for the poor, for lack of a better word, or for some village somewhere. And there's a power right there, but then there's this overriding, oh, well, we're doing it because our higher power tells us to, right? But then if you're not a church based and they're like, well, gosh, I don't know what's the motivation, and the motivation for giving, right, should just be forgiving, not because there's an outcome or because a higher power tells you to do it or because it's tithing and what your dad and your grandpa all did. It's just, you just do it, just like you just go to the bus and you try, and I get it that a person might have to wait for 5 days and you know, to get the next bus, but it's a complex topic, and I'm just trying to unpack what are some of the core psychological inherited constructs and norms that we've taken on as humans for centuries about that power of, now that I've given you something, I have a expectation, and that
For sure.
expectation doesn't include failure. The expectation
Mm-mm.
only includes reward, whether it's reward up in heaven or reward, with your neighbors. Yeah.
Or even that status that one can get by saying I've saved the lives of thousands of children here and there,
Right.
like that is a status thing that oftentimes also adds, I think, that the social element, there's obviously the economic element as well. I also think that, you know, like a lot of this, when you look back into different communities, right? You know, the world we live in today is fairly kind of structured around the ideals of capitalism and the structures of capitalism. And so we're working under a structure that is pretty top down. It's always been top down. And so it's a very difficult structure we're working with, and we're trying to dismantle that. But if you
Right.
take a, you know, if you shift your kind of perspective, and we had this with one of our convenings, Teju, who spoke with us a few months ago, talked about different communities that are not based under the structure of capitalism, or at least under the strict structure of capitalism. You start seeing differences, right? And
Right.
the way people think of money is not something that you accumulate, it is something that you earn to give out. And oftentimes in
Right.
many communities around the world, and I know within the US as well, there are communities, more indigenous communities, ethnic groups around the world, that oftentimes will collect wealth and then distribute it equal parts to everyone in the community, so that we can rise more people, right? And
Right.
lift more people out of poverty, ensure everyone has education, healthcare benefits to all. And I know that gets into political territory, and that's not where we're trying to get today. But I do think that when you start looking at these examples, it does give some hope for philanthropy to start existing outside of the realm of capitalism or traditional capitalism.
Right.
And I think that would be interesting to really explore. And I think we start seeing that with a lot of different organizations, with a lot of institutions. I know a lot of what we're trying to do at Little Big Fund, right? We're not necessarily requiring people to have bank accounts to be able to receive money, because
Right.
bank accounts are often connected to, institutions, and you've got to have the formalized process to receive money. And we're trying to really push that forward and saying maybe we can do mobile money. Maybe there are other ways to get that funding to the people that need it. So